There he is.
Oh, there. Good evening, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to the regular city council meeting for April the 2nd. I'd like to ask everybody that can to stand as we start every meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Any agenda additions, deletions, or amendments, Mr. Wolfley?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. If you would, I'd like to ask that we take the last item off the consent agenda and move it to as soon as we can schedule for next available schedule session.
Any objection? Nope. All right, item H will go to the next general meeting. Okay. Citizen participation, anybody sign up?
No, sir.
Okay, thank you. Presentations. Are you going to do those?
Yes, sir.
All right, well, we are pleased to take an opportunity to recognize one of our great partners in the incredible fundraising effort that we did for Hurricane Relief. So we'd like to invite some members of the Navy Federal Credit Union. And as an Army member, I want you to know this hurts to invite the Navy Credit Union up here. Gentlemen. Are you here? Do we have guests from Navy Federal? Oh, please join us up here. Mr. Gardner is going to officiate.
Yes. Hello. I'm Margaret Carter. Good to meet you. Hey, good to see you again. Good to see you again. Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We want to recognize Navy Federal Credit Union for being a great partner and a great community business partner on behalf of the fine work that they did in helping with the hurricane relief efforts that we had a fundraiser here with the city of Bowie. It was titled Spare Pocket Change, where we asked that residents here in the city of Bowie join us, come in and drop off all of their spare pocket change, and they did. And with that, after the change was collected, Navy Federal here, their employees, their great staff, counted all of these nickels, dimes, quarters, pennies, and so forth, put them in rolls, transferred this over into a large cashier's check in which it was mailed down to Houston. And I want to thank them for doing all of what they did, because they came in on a Saturday. This is their employees. They came in on a Saturday when you could have been at home resting or with your families. You took time out of your own personal schedules to come out and support those who were most in need. And we'd like to present on behalf of the council and the mayor for the city of Bowie, be it hereby known to all that the council of the city of Bowie, Maryland, takes great pleasure in recognizing Navy Federal Credit Union, Bowie, Crofton, and Glendale offices on the occasion of their support to the city of Bowie during a Hurricane Relief Fundraiser. The City Council and the City of Bowie wishes to extend our appreciation for your service and community commitment, and we are pleased to extend our sincere best wishes for all your future efforts. Presented this second day of April 2018 signed by our Mayor, G. Fred Robertson, and our Clerk, Wilder Hernandez. This is for Navy Federal. I'm going to ask Councilmember Marcos if he would read the other one.
Thank you very much. Good to be here, and thank you all so much for all your help. Be it hereby known to all that the Council of the City of Bowie, Maryland takes great pleasure in recognizing Michelle Atai. Did I pronounce that right?
That is.
All right. Navy Federal Credit Union in Crofton on the occasion of the support to the City of Bowie during the Hurricane Relief Fundraiser. The City Council of the City of Bowie, Maryland, wishes to extend our appreciation for your service and community commitment, and we are pleased to extend our sincere best wishes for all of your future efforts. Signed by our good mayor. Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right, and Councilmember Stan.
Is either Justin or I here?
Isaiah and Justin are both not here today.
But we want to recognize him.
Well, we'll read them out real quick.
Okay.
Be it hereby known to all.
I mean, extension.
That's right, an abstention. So be it hereby known to all, the Council of the City of Bowie, Maryland takes great pleasure in recognizing Justin Freeman and I, Perry, of Navy Federal Credit Union on the occasion of the support of the City of Bowie during the Hurricane Relief Fundraiser. The City Council of the City of Bowie, Maryland wishes to extend our appreciation for their service and community commitment, and we are pleased to expend our sincere best wishes for all their future efforts. Presented the 2nd day of April 2018, signed Mayor G. Frederick Robinson. Oh, and, I'm so sorry, Mr. Isaiah Williams. What a big team effort.
Yes. And then we also have one final, okay? And this one is going to Mrs. Kiana Barrett. Yes, there we go. Thank you again. And we are very, very happy to have you here in Bowie.
Thank you very
Okay, and
much.
we understand you're building another location.
We are. We're going to be building a location.
The microphone's
We're going to be building a location very close to the Bowie Bay Sox, right across the street from the Bowie Bay Sox. And it's going to be a full-service branch with a drive-through. It should open at the end of the year.
Oh, great. Well, welcome to Bowie. We're
Thank
happy
you.
to have you.
Thank you so very much.
And thank you again for all your work. Thank you. Thank you so much. We'll call on you in the future.
Okay. Under council announcements, I just have one. I want to take a moment on behalf of the council to give a shout out to our 23rd delegation. We were recently informed that as a result of their efforts and our lobbyist team of Mr. Lucci, Mr. Pounds, we are going to receive 2 bond bills from the state legislature this year, one in the amount of $200,000 that's going to go to service at the senior center, and one in the amount of $100,000 that's going to help us with funding for the Bowie Police Call Center. I really want to thank, Senator Peters for his leadership on the Senate side, all our delegates, particularly for Chairman Joe Valerio, who took leadership on getting us. We're really impressed with all 3 of our members on the House side and the senator for the help. The $300,000 will go a long way.
Absolutely.
City manager report.
Mr. Mayor, I don't have a report, but I would like to hand over to the city attorney to make an introduction.
Good evening. I just want to take a minute to introduce my new-ish colleague, Karen Fetterman-Henry, who is here to meet you this
good evening.
You will be seeing Karen next week, since you have a special meeting and I am committed elsewhere. Karen spent quite a number of years in the Montgomery County Attorney's Office, where she held a number of very senior positions, and so she has quite a lot of experience with local government issues, and I'm so thrilled to have her because it's so unusual for me to be able to find somebody so well qualified to assist me. I am certain that you will find her both very knowledgeable and very personable, and I'm wanted to introduce you.
Well, thank you. If she talked to you about us, I'm sure she sugarcoated us. Because
No, I was quite
we're not as nice as she
deadly
probably
honest.
is. Well, welcome aboard. We're glad to have you. Thank you. Thank you. All right, consent agenda. Council got items A through G. Do I have a motion on the consent? Moved by Mr. Gardner, second by Mr. Marcos. Any question on the motion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Unanimous. New business item A, Bowie Green Team Committee presentation. Who's going to present?
Mr.
Good evening.
Dustin Kazone.
Welcome.
How's everyone doing? Here we go. Good evening. How
So you just walk up and things start happening.
Well, good evening, Mayor, Council, and City staff, and thanks for having me today. I'm here, my name is Dustin Kuzan. I'm here to present on behalf of the Multimodal Transportation and Public Spaces subgroup of the Bowie Green Team. As soon as the presentation loads, I'll get in that. First of all, I'd like to show, is there people in the crowd here that are affiliated with the group that want to show their hand or stand? Or,
Please. Thank you for everything that you're doing.
All right, so this is actually a one-year anniversary. We started our first meeting back in last year, February 2017. I think that's maybe around February, March, we became an official committee of the city. So it's a good time for us to give this presentation to you. We actually have a good idea where we're headed and what we want to do now. And we spent a lot of time on slogans and all that to try to really make things appealing. So we finally got that now down a little bit. But we're engaged and enthusiastic citizens of Bowie, and we are connecting Bowie with green spaces and vibrant places. So we'll get into that a little more, what that means. So MAPS is our acronym we've been using. Just to let you know, this name has been under debate lately, and it may change sooner or later, so don't get too attached. But MAPS is multimodal transportation for the M, and then N, public spaces. And we are an official subcommittee of the Green Team Executive Committee. And we work very closely with the Environmental Advisory Committee, and we work very closely with the Bowie Planning Department, so we're sort of like a conglomeration of all three of these things put together. And we serve as an advisory committee to the city council, but we also work very closely with the Bowie Planning Department on projects and moving projects forward and finding resources for projects and things like that. And then on the Environmental Advisory Committee side, we do a lot of policy. In the Green Team, we work more with advancing green projects and things like that. So I'd like to start off with just a little bit about kind of the impetus of our group. And I think every member in our group, when we had long conversations about where we see the city of Bowie headed, and we all want to get involved in the city and kind of help steer it in a direction we'd like to see where the city's going, particularly with the growth that's going on in the city. And, for decades or century, whenever the city's been created back in 1916, we have this history of being kind of a sleepy suburb. People move here because they want to live here and then commute to DC or Baltimore, Annapolis. And over time, I think, especially recently, as development's spanning out in this direction, we're getting developers interested in here because we're along a major east-west corridor, along US 50, a major north-south corridor on 301, 197. And these developers have an interest because of our location and with the MARC train and all that. And but we don't have a city, because we're a sleepy suburb, we haven't had a lot of time and a lot of opportunity to deal with these development issues in the sense of like maybe Bethesda or Silver Spring or Rockville, where they've been doing this for decades. So they've gotten a really good handle on nailing down these standards and these protocols for developers, and really hammering on them about building walkable, bikeable connections and vibrant places and things like that. So we're seeing that today we're looking at it, and a lot of members of our group feel that some of the retail centers are lacking creativity or lacking connection to the surrounding neighborhoods. A lot of the infrastructure is built for people to get in their cars and drive around, and you're slowly losing that sense of community, whereas where it was once a small town feel, that the bigger we get and the more congestion there is and the more traffic, the more barriers from your community and the more isolated you become. So, when I moved here 8 years ago, I felt this strong sense of community, and where I still feel it now, I feel like as we're growing, we're slowly moving away from that. And all of our group, we'd really hate to see that sense of community lost in Bowie, and this is our sort of solution to make sure we retain that. Part of it is also just having designs that have kind of a modern appeal, like working with, just because we're out in the suburbs of DC doesn't mean that, we want to be just a suburb, that we can have unique places, we can have multimodal connections, things like that. So the first thing we need to do, and this is, I'm going to keep it basically just to to this, if there's one message I can give to you guys, is this vision. And I'll be back again to present, and I promise my team will be back to present on more things. But this is the one thing we want to get across, is that we're really looking for a strong vision in the city. And so as we grow, this strong vision will help the city become or retain that sense of community. And not just any community, but a community that is unique, active, and vibrant. And in order to do that, our primary solution to this is really focusing on the infrastructure that's built. And the infrastructure we'd like to see kind of promote a sense of culture in the city that is an active culture, it's a healthy culture, it's a creative culture, a socially oriented culture, an environmentally conscious culture, and my favorite word, vibrant culture. And we think if we can build this infrastructure that promotes this culture in the city of all these things, that we can really develop an amazing sense of place, an amazing place where someone could live that's, you know, an alternative to the urban lifestyle that is starting to grow here, you know. And here's a picture that I think describes vibrant pretty well. Dancing paint. All right, so we really have 4 goals that we're focusing on right now. 1, to increase active transportation options. That means, you know, building bike lanes, building linear trails, maybe even transit at some point. We're not into that yet, but we're focusing on lower hanging fruit right now. But things that we can kind of, you know, people can get around the city without having to get in the car, and you know, hopefully it'll help reduce traffic in the city. And number 2, we want to connect neighborhoods with community destinations. That could mean, you know, connecting short trails from people's residence to the shopping centers, but it could also mean things like Tanglewood Park, which one of our members has started a project to try to revitalize Tanglewood Park, which has sort of been a forgotten park that has been kind of fallen to the wayside. And so that's sort of not just physical connections, but also, or not just connections from one place to another, but connecting people within that place. The other thing, we want to encourage our developments and our private sector partners to kind of build a unique sense of place, have options that you can't find in other areas around outside of Bowie, you know, so that this becomes more of a destination where people come to Bowie or stay in Bowie because this is a unique place. And the last thing is also just promoting a vibrant and active culture by education, outreach, and just getting people excited about this opportunity. So those are really our 4 goals that we're focusing on. And our activities, our 4 main activities, is 1, we're working with, primarily working with Joe Miner and through the annual CIP process to identify projects and find resources for projects. But also, you know, as we're growing and we're advancing, we're going to hopefully start reaching out to other areas for resources for projects. And we're hoping that we can get a whole streamline of projects going and maybe even have them programmed out for years from now. We're also helping to engage with key partners, so not just the city, but also partners with the county and partners with the state and other departments, you know, not just State Department of Transportation, but maybe planning, Department of Natural Resources. You know, we want to help the city to advocate that it's not just the city council asking for these things, but there's actually a group of citizens here that are really trying and really interested in these things. The other thing is we're looking to improve guidelines for this type of things, for multimodal transportation in public spaces. And what we mean by that is, you know, perhaps complete streets guidelines, perhaps, you know, just best practice guidelines for developments, or even just how to design bike lanes along roadways. And then last but not least is we're doing active outreach and raising awareness through events like the Green Expo, Bowie Fest, just getting in touch with citizens one-on-one and getting them involved with the activities that we're doing. So as we move forward, you know, our group's going to be talking a lot about multimodal connections, And I just want to clarify, what exactly that means. I don't know, if you're not in the industry of transportation, you might not know exactly what it means. So essentially what we're asking is what we're trying to accomplish is we're trying to construct and we're trying to maintain. And maintain's an important aspect of that too, not just building, but also maintaining infrastructure that can connect neighborhoods and retail. This includes sidewalks, bike paths, trails, crosswalks, bike lanes, and anything along that topic there. And it's not just building, so it's not just a number and the quantity that we're trying to build, but we also want to emphasize that it's quality that makes a really good product. That we want the city to sort of adhere to best practices nationwide. That it's not just build it as to our current standards, but we want to be kind of a beacon of this is where people look at, hey, the city of Bowie knows what they're doing when it comes to this stuff. They're making these things exceptional, and this is the place you want to go if this is where you want to live in a community where you want to walk and where you want to bike and have other modes of transportation. So just some pictures of things I want to show. These two exist in Bowie. These are, like I said in the beginning, we're connecting Bowie with green spaces and vibrant places. These are some examples of green spaces. This is one right next to my house on the left here is a little trail that goes through White Marsh Park. I run on it as often as I can, and it's amazing how I don't even have to get my car or anything. I don't even take my keys with me. I just click. I hope no one knows where I live and looking for me when I go for a run now. But yeah, it's just great. Like you're in a suburban urban environment and then you're surrounded by trees just like that. And I think everyone should have something like that right outside their house. This is to the right is a newer trail that was built along the WB&A trail extension, and this is a gorgeous place. And if anyone gets a chance to go walk or bike, it's up by racetrack, off a racetrack road by the old racetrack, but by the trailhead on WB&A Trail. But that's an awesome place. So we want to see more of these places around. I think everyone should have a place like this right in walking distance of their house. Social places. This is Rockville, Maryland, and of course we don't have anything on this scale. But social places kind of builds energy in a community. It kind of connects you to your neighbors, allows you to feel a sense of community and neighbor, get to know your neighbors. This is where you can talk about things going on in the city and get engaged. And one example of this that I was at on Friday night was down on 450 at Marketplace is my Crescent Beer and Wine. And that's it's a very social environment in there and very friendly. And if you go in there often enough, you'll get to know everybody there and everyone will say hi to you when you walk in. So there are places in Bowie, but they're rare and they're not to this scale. But we'd like to see more of these things. Unique spaces. This is a unique cafe. Serves beer, serves coffee, and is also a bike shop up in Baltimore. But if we can encourage these things, like local entrepreneurs to come get creative, and this used to be just like a garage of some sort that somebody converted into this. And these are things that would be amazing in Bowie to have. Nothing, super impressive, but it draws people. It gives you, again, builds that kind of sense of community and that uniqueness. And last but not least, vibrant places. And this is in Silver Spring, and you can just, by vibrant, you could feel that energy with the kids playing in the water and all that. And we'd like to see more and more of that as well. So there are just some examples of what we're trying to do. And moving forward, in partnership, we recognize this is a partnership, and we're here to be a partner with the city. And we look forward to making this vision that I just described a reality. And we're in it for the long run. So if it takes, 10 years, 20 years, we're here for the long haul. So just come out to see us. This weekend we'll be out at the Green Expo at a table outside. So come look for us, stop by, visit, say hello. Goes for anyone else in the room as well. And also we have monthly meetings every third Wednesday at 7 p.m. at the Ken Hill Center. So again, come out, feel free to come out and join us. And here's a picture of us at our meeting at the Ken Hill Center. And that's all I'd like to say, so thank you very much.
Okay, well, thank you, and thank you. Before you go, hang on. Any questions for our guest? Mr. Stead?
Hey, Dustin, thanks for the presentation tonight. I see from the picture you have all the troublemakers in one spot.
One on the
Just
left.
two quick remarks. I think the placemaking in particular, I think, is going to be really relevant to us down the road, especially as we look at redesigning a lot of our existing retail centers. We know that retail's in trouble nationwide, and I anticipate that a lot of our existing commercial partners are going to basically ask for residential in places where it doesn't currently exist. I know we've had that come up at Hilltop a couple times. We just did it at Marketplace, and I expect probably at Free State we'll eventually have that conversation too. And I like the fact that there's a group talking about placemaking specifically, because I think that's one great way that we can kind of find a synthesis between where residents are, which is to say that they hate the idea of new residential, but you know, potentially introduce a concept that when, you know, some of these commercial partners of ours do look at protecting their retail centers in the future, you know, to incorporate public spaces and to think actively about placemaking, I think could go a long way in helping a lot of these spots that we have that are going to face headwinds, as a lot of retail centers have nationally. So I'm really glad that there's a group that's actively thinking about that. And as far as the multimodalism, I think that's going to be really important too. Congestion has been a critical issue that's come up with every single development project we've talked about in the last 2 years that I've been here. And so to the extent that we have a group that's working with the planning department and actually talking about how can we move people from immediate neighborhoods to nearby retail centers that doesn't involve a vehicle, I think that's going to be really important too. So I would just encourage staff, especially planning, to, you have some background in this, right, Dustin?
Yeah.
Especially in the trails and the roads.
Yeah, my whole career has been in transportation, particularly in walking, biking modes of transportation.
And I know that you have several members of this group or also have a little bit of like expertise and background as well in this area.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think well, most
One
of
of
our
the-
members are NASA
Yeah, I'd
scientists.
really like to encourage staff to take seriously a lot of the things that this group is talking about, especially when it comes to the multimodal connections, and thinking actively whenever we are talking about a particular commercial project, finding better ways to move people from immediate neighborhoods into those centers, because I think that'll go a long way in, you know, helping to make sure that a lot of these new commercial and residential projects we look at in the next few years aren't just a negative for the residents that already exist, but can actually create some positives. Anyway, but I appreciate your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Thank you as well. I think it was a very nice presentation. Quick question for you. Has there been any discussion about bike share? And I know obviously there's not a lot of use for it in a true suburban environment, but there are little clusters of, you know, dense housing, and of course we have retail space. Has there been any thought about doing some sort of bike share type of infrastructure?
We haven't discussed it particularly, but I would be willing to bet that majority of our group would be in favor of that. I'm not sure if you can feasibly make it work with the population and the densities and stuff. But I think we'd be more than excited to at least investigate to see what possibilities may, you know.
Yeah, my thought would be that it's a bit of a stretch, but there may be a possibility. I know there are a lot of new bike share operations that don't require the physical infrastructure for, you know, fixed locations for depositing or picking up bikes. You just use the app, find the bike, ride over to wherever it is, and you just leave the bike wherever you happen to be. So there may be some opportunity. I'm not sure what the costs are associated with that to entice some of these organizations to put bikes in the community. I'm sure they got a business model, and I suspect that we're not top of their demographic for it, you know, given the nature of our community, but it might be something to help take advantage of some of these trails we've got.
I think we'd be happy to do some preliminary research and let you know what we find.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you.
That's it, thank you. Thank you, and thank you to your
Any other
team as
questions for
well.
our guests? Okay, well, thank you very much. The next expo is the 14th?
Yep.
Okay,
14.
all day, what's it, like 9 to 12, or
I'm not sure.
anybody know what the hours are?
For the expo?
Yeah, the Green Expo is on the 14th, I know, but I don't remember what the hours are. 12 to 4, okay. Well, we'll see you there.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right, item next is CDBG Consolidate Plan for 2019 to 23.
Good evening.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening. This is the fourth five-year plan that the city is preparing for a presentation to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. And after many years as a participant in the county's program, the city became a direct entitlement community in 2003, enabling the city to receive funds directly from HUD for that CDBG program. For the 2019 to 2013 five-year period that we're working on now, we've engaged in extensive planning, community outreach, and citizen participation processes for the past, 9 months. We have conducted public hearings, community meetings, and solicited comments online, and conducted a citywide survey. Additionally, we engaged the services of a nationally recognized consultant, Mullen and Lonergan, that is here, that has done a number of these consolidated plans all over the country, plus they were the ones who helped us develop the past five-year plan. Before I delve too much into the results of our work, I would like to ask Marjorie Willow, who's the senior representative from Mullen and Lonergan, to provide you with an overview of the initial findings of their housing needs assessment and housing market analysis that we have included and incorporated as part of our decision-making process. I was told to give an extensive introduction so that could come up on the screen. I hope that I've done my job. With that, Marjorie Willow of Mullen and Lonergan. Thank you.
Welcome, ma'am. Good to have you here.
Good evening. I'm sorry that my presentation does not have the great pictures, the photographs that the previous one did. I feel a bit stilted here following that great presentation. That was very vibrant. It really was. So while Jesse has undertaken the lead on a lot of the community participation process that is required of the consolidated plan, we are helping with the preparation of the document. And I thought that at this point, we're still pretty in the very early stages of the data. And rather than really inundate you with a lot of numbers, what I thought would be the most helpful to you to know, as well as the most useful information for you at this point, is what are the changes in the households and housing need over the past 5 years. So 5 years ago when the city did this versus the situation now. And so that's what I wanted to highlight, and I just have a few charts that I wanted to bring to your attention. And the first one up there shows that the number of lower income households in Bowie has actually increased over the past 5 years by about 800, those two middle income bands. And in the second graphic below, it's showing housing problems among renter households. And the way that HUD defines housing problems are either cost burden, where you're paying more than 30% of your income for your housing cost, the housing unit is overcrowded, or you have incomplete kitchen and plumbing facilities. And across the board, in almost all communities, cost burden is by far the greatest housing problem. So you have a lot of renters and owners who are paying more than 30% of their income for their housing. In the top chart there, we're showing that owner households in the two lower income groups, their housing problems have increased. And one reason is because homeowners far outnumber renters in Bowie. But also there's an issue because these are among homeowners in the lowest income levels. These would tend to be folks that are on fixed income, maybe you're elderly, and where their incomes are fixed, and even if they're not paying a mortgage, if their mortgage has been paid, their utility costs continue to rise, their property taxes rise, and their homeowner's insurance would rise. And so these three elements alone would cause them to be paying more than 30% of their income on their monthly housing costs, which is one reason why for quite a number of years the city has dedicated its community development block grant to housing rehab for elderly homeowners, which makes a lot of sense. You do some energy efficiency improvements, thereby trying to reduce their monthly utility costs, and that's one way to assist them. In the bottom group, in the bottom graphic, we're showing cost burden among renter households. And it's actually decreased in the two lower income groups. It has increased in the higher 50 to 80%. Probably most likely because this was also the largest renter group to increase in households overall. And the final chart, again, is just showing the cost burden among owner households. And you can see how between 2009 and 2015, the orange bars are showing you how many more owner households are paying more than 30% of their income on their housing costs. And specifically, if you break this down even further, so if you take those owner households and you look at whether they're elderly households, they're small related, large related, or other households, meaning unrelated single individuals living together in a household. That increase is primarily among elderly households, almost 200, and the small family households, over 300. So the purpose in giving you this information is just to sort of set the stage in terms of how to think about where to spend your community development block grant allocation for next year. Even though there's been a dedication of that funding source to homeowner rehab for elderly households, you can see that there's still a large segment of that household population that is paying more than 30%. The issue with paying more than 30% of your total monthly income on your housing expenses means that you have less disposable income then to pay for medicine, your drugs, your food, your transportation costs, and any other needs that you might have. And that's where it really becomes an issue.
Good.
And that's it. Thank you.
Anything back from you, Mr. Buggs?
We can get to questions for Marjorie if you want a little bit later.
You
Okay.
might want to, Ms. Ma'am, you might want to stay here. I don't have some questions for you. Do you have anything to close?
Yes.
Okay, go.
Yeah, no, I have quite a bit. She could, unless
sorry?
you have questions for her now.
Oh, well, no. Do
You see-
anybody have any questions for discuss?
No.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Okay, thank you, Marjorie. What we've done is in the documents you received called citizen input and proposed projects for this meeting this evening, we've given you a summary of the survey results that we received. We mailed out approximately 6,000 survey instruments and distributed them in a number of places, and the information is also provided online for people to complete. We received approximately 900 responses, and the summary of those responses is in the document you received. You can see, for instance, that 95% of all the respondents noted that they live in the city of Bowie. Significant numbers, the majority were in 20715 and 20716. What we've done is summarize for you, and I've provided in the document on pages 7 and 8, what I consider to be an even more condensed synopsis of the findings in the 6 categories that we asked them to rank: high, medium, low, and no need. And what you see in those 6 categories for housing, community facility improvements, community services, infrastructure and public improvements, economic development, homeless facilities and services, that there are some pretty high numbers represented there in terms of what those residents are saying that they would like the city either to improve or to add. What we've decided to do based on the information we've collected and on the information provided by the consultants, and this is a collection of all the information. I think we've done almost 10 public hearings and community outreach meetings across the entire city over this period. and in listening to residents and considering what eligible activities we have for CDBG-funded projects, we've recommended that for the first year, we create a major housing rehab program citywide contingent upon income constraints as imposed by HUD, and that we prioritize those and make sure that we try to get to seniors, people with disabilities, veterans, public safety officials, as well as teachers. That would be one program we would do. The second program is that we would also try to create a workforce training and orientation program. That's another high need that was expressed. And we would try to do both of those programs for the first 2 years while we evaluate other needs that might arise in the city, to make a recommendation of the analysis to the city manager to see how he wanted to present that to council if needed. So the first 2 years, our recommendation are 2 programs, a citywide housing rehab program. As you know, we've had extensive experience doing that. We have completed over 200 homes in the past 10 years of senior citizens in excess of $2 million in providing them with funds at the low rate of $10,000 per household to do everything from put roofs on their houses to replacing all of their windows, to putting lifts on the steps, and a number of those kind of internal construction and rehab projects. We run all of these projects within the grants office, within the constraints of the budget provided by HUD. So one of the things we also wanted to point out is that the recommendations we're making here today are strictly based on monies that we received as our allocation from HUD and no other funds at this time being requested from the city. So for the first 2 years, we're projecting to run these 2 programs. Third year, reevaluate to determine if we need to make a change. If not, we'll continue with those programs on the same basis unless the city wants to expand them for any reason, and then we would have an opportunity to come back and see to what extent you want to make an additional contribution. Having said that, that runs a 5-year program. Having looked at the analysis of the survey results and the comments that were provided, if you have any questions, we'll take them at this time, but that is our recommendation for the next 5 years, that we come back to you on May 7th in a few weeks with those programs designed and with the 5-year consolidated plan for the 5-year period, plus the annual action plan for the first year for your approval and for us to send that to HUD. I also want to say that it's a good thing this is recorded. We have a HUD representative who's responsible for monitoring us and making sure that we get paid sitting in the audience tonight. I won't point her out, not him, I won't point her out, but she is here, so I'm just going to make sure that everything we say tonight, because I know she'll discuss it with me later. But that is our recommendation. First 2 years, the housing rehab program across the city, income dependent, with priorities for senior citizens, folks with disabilities, people in the military or veterans, and a couple other categories, and then also a workforce training program. As you know, the last time we ran the program, it was fully subscribed. Not only we complete the program running it at night with different programs for young people and those who are older, but we also were able to obtain jobs for everybody that was in the program. So we're going to attempt to do the same thing again this time because we've gotten a number of calls and requests to continue that program or recreate it. So that's our recommendation for the evening.
Okay. Do we have any signed up to speak?
No, sir.
Declare the public hearing to have been completed. Do we have any questions from Mr. Bugs? Okay, council, you have a recommendation from staff to adopt Resolution 1718, is it? And direct staff to come back with the plan. Have a motion?
Second.
Moved by Mr. Wolfley, second by Mr. Marcos. Any questions on the motion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Unanimous. Thank you, sir. Thank you for all you've done on this project. This is a worthwhile project, and I know it's not easy going through that labyrinth that we know as HUD. You have developed a skill package for that is unbelievable.
Thank you very much.
All right, item next, Retail Village, east of Milford Center.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. For the record, Frank Stevens from the City Planning Staff. Here tonight to review with you a detailed site plan for Retail Village East at the Melford Town Center. The focus of the detailed site plan is for building architecture, parking lot design and layout, building materials, landscaping, signage, and things of that nature. This proposal is for retail buildings totaling 57,845 square feet, a total of 5 buildings on 6.3 acres of property in Melford. The property is zoned MXT, mixed-use transportation oriented, and the retail component, the retail uses are permitted by right under the Prince George's County zoning ordinance. This first slide is attachment 1 in your packet, and it shows the Melford development. To the south, to the bottom of the page, is US 5301, and to the west, to the left, is Route 3. Melford Boulevard comes in from the left, from the west, in this alignment through here. The property we're talking about, the 6.3 acres, are located in this area here, just to the west of the Melford House and just to the south of the stormwater management pond. The U.S. Census building is also to the south in this location. This next slide is more focused in on the area we're discussing tonight under the detailed site plan. On the bottom of the page to the south is Melford Boulevard. The stormwater pond is over here in the upper left, and the Melford House is in this location to the east. As part of the development in this area, there's going to be constructed a new roadway. Right now it's being called the East-West Boulevard, which goes from a new intersection at Melford Boulevard to the northwest in this curved alignment and continues straight to the east. The first 2 buildings are located in this location. They're about 6,500 square feet each. The third building, retail building, is located here. Across the street from that is building 4, a future restaurant, and building 5 is to the south, a possible small grocery store. There's also another new public road that will be constructed as part of this development. We're referring to it right now as Road B, which would connect this East-West Boulevard with Melford Boulevard down here. There are several pedestrian crossings provided across Road B in 3 locations. There's on-street parking proposed along Road B as well as along the East-West Boulevard. The retail buildings are served by a parking lot in this location, and there's also a parking lot to serve the restaurant up here. We reviewed the detailed site plan, and we discussed that beginning on page 5 of our report. For compliance with the county zoning ordinance, design guidelines, for the conceptual site plan, design guidelines for Melford, for compatibility with the city's development review guidelines and policies, and for master plan conformance, which is discussed on page 14 of our report. Just briefly, the architecture for the first 3 buildings, buildings 1, 2, and 3, include the use of 2 colors of red brick, a standing seam metal roof, aluminum storefront windows, awnings, ephes, and white trim materials. The architecture of buildings 1 and 2 are very similar. The architecture is 4-sided, meaning there are no unfinished sides to these buildings. This is the architecture for building 2. This elevation here would face East-West Boulevard, and the one elevation identified as number 3 faces the parking lot. These are the 2 end elevations. And then building 3 is the longest building of the 3 retail buildings. This top elevation would face East-West Boulevard, and this bottom one would face the interior parking lot. The architecture for buildings 4 and 5 will be provided at a future detailed site plan when specific users have been identified for those buildings, and an amended site plan application, detailed site plan application will be submitted for signage, building materials, architecture, and things of that nature. We're recommending approval of this detailed site plan as specified on page 14 of our staff report. I'd like to point out that the detailed site plan is proposing a sitting area in this location to the west of Building 3. There's a pavilion that's proposed on the northwest side of East-West Boulevard, overlooking the stormwater pond. This will be connected via a stairway as well as a switchback trail to connect to the existing trail around the stormwater management pond. There are 3 identified pedestrian crossings across East-West Boulevard from the retail area to the west side of East-West Boulevard. There's one in this location between buildings 1 and 2. There's one in this location between buildings 2 and 3, which people can cross to get to the pavilion. And the third one is at the intersection of East-West Boulevard and Road B. We recommended in our report that all the crosswalks be constructed of brick pavers, and we also recommending in this middle crossing as well as the one at East-West Boulevard and Road B, that the center of the intersections also be constructed of brick pavers of a contrasting color that is different from the crosswalks to more closely identify the crosswalks. In our memo dated March 29th, we said there was a revised condition, Condition 3C. The applicant has, we have agreed with the applicant that instead of using street print for the intersection at Road B and East-West Boulevard, that the intersection would be block pavers like at the other 2 intersections. That particular condition is also the same as the Condition 3C of our original report that's called out on page 15. In conclusion, we're recommending approval of this particular detailed site plan as highlighted on page 14 of our report, with all the conditions stated on pages 14, 15, and 16 and 17 of our report. That concludes the staff presentation.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, Counselor.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. For the record, Robert Antonetti, the law firm of Shipley & Horn. Pleased to be here on behalf of the applicant, St. John Properties. For the Retail Village East detailed site plan, I want to thank Mr. Stevens for his presentation. You have a fantastic planning staff, and they're a pleasure to work with, and I appreciate their findings and research as compiled in the staff report. Tonight we have our design team, development team here, Mr. Andrew Roud, regional partner with St. John Properties, Ken Finley, development manager with St. John, Jennifer Hearn, to my left, development coordinator, Mr. Mike Carruthers from Somerset Construction, a partner with St. John on the Melford Town Center project, Rich Lutschke and Neat Paul with Bignell Watkins Hasser, the architects, and from Bowler Engineering we have Chris Rizzi. They're the engineers and landscape architects for the project. I do have the opportunity to make this presentation. We've made it a few times. I think we've had a lot of good opportunities to share our vision with the public. We did have a stakeholders meeting on February 27th, 2018. We did have a Bowie Advisory Planning Board on March 13th. And we had a community information session just held last week over at the Kent Hill Center. That was a productive opportunity to have some dialogue, answer some more questions about the vision for this retail center and for the Melford Town Center overall. Tonight we have the third detailed site plan for the Melford Town Center. The first one was for the infrastructure, which is the rough grading, some of the east-west boulevard, the main artery of the new center itself. That's been approved by both this council and the Prince George's County Planning Board. The second one was for the Aspen, which was the first residential application in the Melford Town Center. That's been approved by the council. It's certainly currently pending with the Prince George's County Planning Board. Today we have the Retail Village East. If we could go to the next slide. Just for some history, we have the conceptual site plan layout, which gives the main organizing patterns, which Frank touched on a bit in his presentation. And this is kind of the mix of uses in a bubble type plan setup. And if we go to the next slide here, this is the Retail Village East outlined in red. It's that outline is superimposed over the layout approved, the illustrative layout approved with the preliminary plan of subdivision, which was approved back in 2017. We call it the Retail Village East because it's the dividing road of Melford Boulevard. It is to the east of that. You'll see a blue line outlined area with some buildings. Those are future buildings, not part of this detailed site plan. We call that the Retail Village West. And that'll come forth once we have a bit more momentum on the retail side and identify some additional users for that. But today, we are only here for the Retail Village East. That consists of 5 buildings. If we could go to the next plan. Here, it's kind of a zoom in of what Mr. Stevens showed on his presentation. It's the black and white plan. It really is what the detailed site plan is. It's a 4-cornered plan dealing with the areas showing specific development, showing architecture where appropriate, building footprints, circulation, parking, landscaping, lighting, things of those details. It doesn't really include anything beyond the 4 corners of the plan. There was some discussion which came up in some of the previous public meetings where we talked about some of the bigger items, regional traffic, access in and out, things that are public facility related. Those were tested at time of preliminary plan of subdivision. This really is the next step, which looks at the 4 corners of the plan. While we're certainly willing to discuss those items at any time, the criteria for approval for this detailed site plan are those elements which I outlined within the 4 corners of the property. If we go to the next slide, this is a little more jazzed up illustration of what we're proposing here on the Retail Village East. As you see, there's 5 retail buildings shown. Buildings 1, 2, and 3, and it may be a little hard to see that, but those are on the south side of the future east-west boulevard. Those buildings have architecture proposed as part of this proposal. What you won't see architecture for would be Building 4, up to the north, and Building 5. Building 4 is intended to be a sit-down restaurant, will be a purpose-built building. Once we identify a user, and we're actively looking for users, we'll design a building for that specific user with architecture, with the marks and branding that that particular user would require. Similarly, Building 5 would be our desire there is to have a future food store for the basic essentials for the future residents and employees of the Melford Town Center and the Melford project as a whole. That will also be a purpose-built building, which architecture and design specifics related to that specific tenant or end user. Right now, we're in the active process of trying to identify those users, but we don't have that architecture for you tonight. When we do, we'll come in with a detailed site plan revision. You'll get to see that consistent with the requirements of the covenants before we file anything with Prince George's County. If we can go to the next slide. This is the opening perspective that we have, and I'll bring Rich Letsky up to talk about, walk you through the vision, the character, and the feel of what we're trying to accomplish here with the Retail Village East. So if I could bring Rich up, and then we'll bring up Nee Paul to talk about some of the specific elevations, and we'll get through that quickly and get to any of your questions. So
Okay, thank you.
Appreciate
Welcome,
it.
sir.
Thank you.
Good evening. As Rob said, I'm here to talk in a little bit more detail about the plan itself. So our 5-building village, retail village, is 58,000 square feet, plus or minus. And we use these 5 buildings to create some outdoor spaces that are very pedestrian friendly. They're very well landscaped. They have hardscape features. They hopefully would be very nice outdoor spaces adjacent to some food users, small restaurants, and lots of nice places to just hang out. So if we go to the next one. So this is the entrance to East-West Boulevard. And we have the identifying sign that you can see on the left of the drawing. It says Melford. There's a nice median in the middle of the street that's well landscaped. Building 1 is on your right, along with Building 2. And to the left is what we're calling a promenade. It's a wide sidewalk. This part of it is a little bit narrow in this view, but as we move down to the break between Buildings 1 and 2, sidewalk is about 15 feet wide here. And this crosswalk is even wider. That's 20 feet wide. You can see that through the mews between the two buildings, outdoor seating with street furniture. You can see some lighting, some decorative lighting. We're calling it Tivoli lighting to connect between the buildings. So this will really glow at night. There are entrances on both sides. Actually, there could be on all 4 sides of the buildings, depending on the users, the ultimate end users. But protected entrances with the awnings on all 4 sides of the buildings. All these buildings have a 2-story appearance, but they are 1-story buildings. Lots of nice street furniture, benches, and you can see just on the left of this view, a brick pier with a light fixture on top. That's what separates the walkway down to the pond from this promenade that we're talking about that follows East-West Boulevard. Next. So now we're a little further down the promenade. We're at the juncture between Buildings 2 and 3, looking back towards Melford Boulevard. On the right is a pavilion that really is a departure point to the pathway down to the pond. And you can take an ADA compliant path, or you can go down a stairway, which we'll show you in a little bit more detail. If you go to the left across the crosswalk where the bicycle is, you'd be going to a plaza right at the end of Building 3. Next slide. So now we're just spinning around, kind of standing in place, looking right at the end of Building 3. You can see that the plaza on the end, sort of between the 2 red awnings, has some built-in seating. There will be opportunities. You can sort of see a metal fence next to the building that would be for that food use tenant to provide outdoor seating, and there could be tables with umbrellas there. Very active space. And then East-West Boulevard, this is where it makes the turn to go east towards Curie Drive, and that's Building 4 sort of shadowed in there on the left, future restaurant building. Now we'll take one more shot and spin around. We're basically in the same place, looking down the path towards the pond, and you can see the brick piers. Again, East-West Boulevard is on your left, and it's a nice gentle grade down to the pond and the existing path. So with that, I'd like to introduce my partner, Nee Paul, to talk in more detail about the buildings.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Nee Paul. I'm Director of Design for our firm, and I'm glad to share with you some of the architectural items with this building. You've seen some of the elevations. I'll dwell on this for a little bit, and then we'll get back to some perspective images to show you some of the things that we came up with for the building. To start off with, the nature of the building is inspired by the Melford House. I mean, I think one of the things we tried to do was come up with architecture that was in harmony, but not a copy of, but respectful of, and would be a good fit. And so the idea there was to pick material and sort of a color texture that would be a good fit with that. And so the main aspect of this is that the color is mostly of that red brick architecture with the cornice, which is sort of a lighter color. So the idea was to make sure that we were creating architecture that was in harmony with that and respectful of the guidelines that were earlier proffered. As you heard earlier, the architecture is four-sided. What's nice about that is there is no rear elevation. All the elevations have the same level of treatment, same level of magnitude, same level of the elements: storefront, lighting, doors, fenestration, heights, canopies. All those treatments maintain on all sides of the building. And it's a challenge in retail, but we try our best to make it work in this case. One other aspect of it is that the building, the character of the building is 2-story in nature. And I think what's nice about this is that it creates architecture that gives very good scale. You'll see this when we pass through some of the other perspectives. If you go to the next perspective image, I think you can see that in this image is you can see the tree canopies and you see how the architecture expresses itself above the tree line. And what's nice about that is that the signage line is not at the top of the building. It's sort of in the middle. And that's what happens when you try to get the fenestration above the signage with the cornice right on top of that. There's one of the things that we try to do with the outdoor spaces, like Rich was talking about, was making sure that the outdoor spaces have specific character to it. So this is an outdoor space that relates to restaurant use, outdoor seating, but again, the walls around the outdoor seating is in character with the buildings, and everything ties together, sort of nice, harmonious architecture and design. Next slide. What this slide shows, I think, is, again, it reinforces some of the bits and pieces of the colors that we try to make in relation to the existing context. The metal roof with the canopy in the pedestrian place. But then again, to the left, you can see, again, what the story of that architecture is and how it undulates and moves. There's movement up and down a little to give you some interest. Next. I spoke earlier about the way we deal with outdoor spaces. The idea there is to make sure that you don't have any leftover space that just sort of happened. So this is a space in between two buildings, but the idea, what we try to bring to the table is to make it into something interesting. So there's outdoor seating, there's storefront that turns around the corner, so it just doesn't feel like an alleyway in between buildings. It has a use and a purpose for it. And then, of course, with lighting as well, I think is a nice amenity for retail. Next slide. Again, what this does, it just reinforces what I was talking about in terms of the two-story nature of the building. You can see the character of the storefront. Up to a certain height, you've got the line of the canopies, and then you've got the signage, and then you've got the windows right above that. It creates a good scale. It fits well with the pedestrian nature of the promenade. Next. What this slide shows is something that's a little bit hard to depict in an elevation, and it's the undulating nature, the sort of a movement back and forth of the facade. When you're looking at it straight on, sometimes it's hard to tell how it steps back and forth. And what this does is shows you with the building on the right side of the image, you can see that we do a bit of step back and forth on the facade. It does about 2 feet in some areas. It just creates a nice character to the architecture. And again, this slide shows you the nature of that streetscape, which we tried hard to maintain, good scale to it, continuous materials that sort of tie all the buildings together. And this just shows you some of what we're doing with the lighting. The idea is in the evening to make the spaces, the idea of placemaking is something that we have great interest in, making spaces that people want to be in. I think it really helps to complement the architecture. So that's the general story of the architecture. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Council?
Well, thank you for the opportunity to make that presentation. That is in essence what we're proposing. We're excited about the next phase in the Milford Town Center's progress, and we're more than happy to answer any questions that you may have at this point.
Okay. Give us a few minutes.
Okay.
So we have.
Thank you.
Everybody signed it? Oh, I'm sorry, staff.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor, I wanted to introduce the new chairman of the Bowie Advisory Planning Board, Mr.
Okay.
Michael Byrd.
Oh,
He's
sorry.
here to present the report from the Advisory Planning Board hearing.
I am so sorry. Welcome, sir.
All right. Not a problem. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, council members. I'll be very, very brief. I just want to give a detail of the public forum that we held on March 14th. I'm sorry, I'm Michael Byrd, Vice Chairman, soon to be incoming Chairman of the Bowie Advisory Planning Board. So we held the open forum on March 14th. There was only one citizen who attended and spoke. Well, actually, it was more citizens that attended, but one person signed up to speak, Mr. James Bilal. His overall concern, his major concern, was the potential increase of the maintenance burden created on our Public Works Department by the road structure, infrastructure, so on and so forth. Mr. Stevens presented the same brief he just presented you, gentlemen. Then he was followed by our counsel, Mr. Antonetti, who was the applicant for St. John's Properties. Following Mr. Antonetti's presentation, he actually requested or presented revised conditions in which the applicant desired to delete conditions 3 subparagraph C1 and 3 subparagraph C2, which is in regards to installing brick pavers within 2 major intersections within the development. This spawned some significant discussion, which included various items such as pedestrian safety concerns, maintainability issues, and overall aesthetics of the various buildings and structures within the community. In conclusion, the PAB moved for approval of the detailed site plan with the recommendation and conditions contained within the staff report and revisions made by conditions 2 subparagraph A and 7 subparagraph C, and further with the exception of condition of 3 subparagraph C1 and 3 subparagraph C2, which should be deleted. The motion was seconded by one of the members and unanimously passed the Bowie Advisory Planning Board. Are there any questions for me?
Okay, thank you. We may get you before you go. I want to go to the public hearing first.
All right.
Okay, thank you. Anybody sign up to speak? As I call your name, if you would come to the table and identify yourself for the folks at home. Okay, Brian Sutter, and he'll be followed by Edward Fraser. Welcome, sir.
Hello, hello. I'm Brian Suddeth. I'm a homeowner at 12604 Brunswick Lane. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. I attended the March 28th public presentation for the Melford Retail, and I believe the project has some benefits and looks pleasant. However, I and many others have serious concerns. The primary concern voiced is traffic. The developer, St. John's Properties, has made improvements to the roadways over several years, but for much of the day, the entrance and exit to Melford leads directly to a parking lot on Route 3301 in both directions. People at Melford currently avoid that by entering our streets like Bel Air Drive, Buckingham, and Brunswick. This is a massive drawback to building such an ambitious development in a cul-de-sac. In City Code Article 3, Bowie has determined minimum acceptable standards of service for residential streets due to an overriding concern for public safety, and sets the minimum acceptable service level for major drives, primary residential streets, and seconded residential streets. This section of our code also specifies that the city's planning department shall not approve or recommend approval of any development that, when added to existing traffic levels, will result in deterioration of traffic conditions on any such street below level of service C, ADT. This is another such situation as those service levels are already exceeded and growing worse. We need this addressed before approving further impacts. I respectfully request City Council table any further development, whether retail or residential at Melford, until the public roads and the Bowie streets are within level of service safety requirements and can handle the additional traffic from this growing cul-de-sac. I would like to poll those present tonight. Is there anyone else here who requests the City Council table and not approve further development which could adversely affect traffic in the area around Melford until roadways and traffic levels can handle the new load? Anyone? So I'm not alone in this.
Okay.
So thank you very much for your
sir.
time.
All right, the next speaker is Edward Fraser. Oh, good to see you, sir.
Good to see you, sir. Mr. Mayor, City Council. Obviously, was on the wrong roster, but I was going to ask a question about last week's meeting. But I have one question, and it's something that's never been raised out of all the meetings I've attended for the Melford project. Is it possible that St. John's Property could possibly go to the state and see about having an alternate entrance off of 50? That would alleviate a lot of the problem with the Melford traffic to cut through traffic for people trying to get to Crofton and parts of their past. Because not only do you have traffic coming from Waldorf, that they live in Baltimore, you have people that work in Baltimore that live down in Waldorf. They're doing developments down there, and Arundel County's doing developments. And this is just all coming to one big little cluster, Route 3, Route 301. It just happens to be mostly at Crofton, parts going south, Bel Air, Melford exit. I've heard no one make any suggestions about approaching the state, possibly having the State Highway Administration come up with a plan to say, okay, let's look at the feasibility of a entrance and exit off of 50. Because if you had one exit just on Melford, and there was a national disaster that required people to be evacuated, most people would never get out of that community. They'd be dead. They'd never hit Route 3 because there's only one way in, one way out. Not cost effective, not smart. They need to have multiple avenues towards 50 if they want to have a development over there that has to allow more access than just one way in, one way out. I don't care how many lanes it is. You still can't take and put 4 inches of piping through a 2-inch hole. That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Just as a frame of reference, years ago, there was an alternative plan, although it was a trumpet interchange off of 50. The state highway took that off the plan 10, 12 years ago. So that was a state action to delete it. So, I mean, we can always bring that up again with them.
Yes, sir, I fully understand that. But now, with traffic surveys being done and everything, I'm just wondering when those traffic surveys were done, and then they include the summer beach traffic, the tourism. Because if you do a traffic survey during the winter months or during a snowstorm, of course you're going to have low numbers.
Okay.
But when you do it to the high season on the busiest day of the week, like a Friday or a Saturday or a Sunday, for that matter, traffic surveys should be done for 30 days so you get the full picture, not just a couple of days.
Okay, gotcha.
Yes,
Thanks,
sir.
sir.
Thank you,
Appreciate
sir.
your comment. Have you had a chance to read that book yet?
Not yet.
Yes.
Tomorrow.
All right, thank you.
I'm reading the 37-page document.
Okay. All right, that's all the people I have signed up to speak. All right, council, your thoughts. Mr. Wolfley, your district.
Actually, I just wanted to add, there's one more person who had a comment, and I'll just do a quick summary on it.
Okay.
For public comment. And this is a District 2 resident, Deborah Rice, indicating that her comments are that there are already 8,000 square feet pad equaling 24,000 square feet in front of the second office building that were supposed to be for supportive retail, and that they've never been built. Why additional buildings when the ones in place are sitting empty? Another concern about the county allowing 290 parking spaces versus the 317 proposed, and the concern about the being disconnect between that and the, quote, walkable nature of the community. Then there is the additional concern about Bowie residents that are disturbed that the huge complex is being allowed to be developed against wetlands, specifically the Patuxent River. The runoff into Maryland's waterways is a concern, and the request that we do not need any more impermeable pavement as its environmental impact is destroying quality of life. Finishing up with wondering if we have the control over stormwater and runoff, and a request to increase impermeable pavement footprint. So that's just a public comment.
Okay.
Unfortunately, the speaker was unable to make it at the last minute.
Okay, thank you.
And so I'll start it on my own thoughts here. Quick questions for staff. Road B, who will own this when it's all said and done?
That will be a city street.
That will be a city street, okay. And so the implications for us, one way or the other, if we maintain it and own it versus the developer, is there any reason why we wouldn't want it?
No, I mean, the streets out there now are public. It would be part of the public road network.
Mm-hmm.
It would serve a function to provide a connection between two other public streets, the East-West Boulevard and Melford Boulevard. So it would really makes sense and logical to have that as a connector road to be a public road.
Okay, all right. Thank you. The next thing, I'll start with representatives for St. John's. First of all, I'd like to thank you for the efforts that you made for having the extra information session. For those that don't know, we had a information session last week. St. John's was kind enough to coordinate that. We had a conflict on the first session where the forum for candidates conflicted with the initial opportunity for the community. So I want to extend my appreciation and signal that really this is an effort to make things as transparent and open for community members, that they can feel that they have an opportunity to engage. And I certainly am committed to that, and I appreciate your support on that. So thank you very much. The first question I have for you is related to green initiatives. In your current plans, I don't see any car charging infrastructure from the standpoint of either high speed or just standard. A couple weeks ago, we saw a presentation from the Green Team outlining how the future of transportation was going to be, going towards electric vehicles, and that there is really a need for infrastructure. The city itself has an electric vehicle, is considering additional. We have also a charging station here at City Hall. There is a charging station up at the at Bowie Town Center. Can you speak to the viability of putting in some charging infrastructure at that location?
I'll ask Mr. Roud to come up and speak to corporate philosophy on that.
Good evening, Andrew Roud with St. John. I think we've envisioned within the Aspen, I think that was taken care of in there, and I forget how many spaces. Do you guys recall? How many spaces in the Aspen would have that?
We have 4, but we have the infrastructure to put it in as many as we need.
You'll have to come back up to the... Right, okay, so we have 4 charging spaces in the Aspen, but what we're envisioning with this is it's convenience-related retail, so we're also assuming this duration is not going to be very long. So people are visiting a friend there, they're not probably going to want to plug the car in for 30 minutes or 40 minutes, whatever they're going to do. So the residents were being provided over in the Aspen building. So we could take a look at it. I mean, we'd be happy to take a look at it and get back to you on it.
Excellent, thank you.
All right.
Solar power. The city has the Ensign property. You can drive through the city and you can see houses that are left and right that are adopting solar as a viable alternative to other energy sources. We've got a lot of rooftop here. We've got a nice facade. By the way, I'm going to say that from the design standpoint, it was excellent work in terms of the architectural. Walking down the street, looking at the facades, this is really going to look like a nice facility. And part of the advantage of that too is that it would obscure any solar panels that would be on the roofs and so forth, but I don't see any solar in any of your plans here.
Again, we could examine that. I can't say that we could commit to it tonight, but that's something we can take a look at and get back to you on it.
Okay.
Yep.
We've had some conversations over time, and this is in the gee whiz category of things. We had a conversation that was actually before I joined the council, that was around the ice arena and the basketball concept. Basketball courts. Earlier this evening, we heard about destination spaces, and we talked a little bit about it in your presentation as well. From the standpoint of this being a community center with obviously residential that's there and that's already on the way in terms of the apartments, and then there's additional proposed approved that's in the plan. Any room for basketball facilities in this area? And I'm not suggesting a full-scale gym or anything along those lines. There are, I think, plenty of ways to skin the cat, if you will, in terms of solving our needs for additional court space. It's 40 by 80, 10 kind of 15 feet on either side. But that sort of space needs to kind of be thought out beforehand because of the structural requirements to ensure that you have open floor space. Is there any opportunity to incorporate any sort of facility, whether it is something that is put in by St. John's Properties for themselves, whether it's a third-party enterprise, because there are plenty of facilities that offer gym services and that sort of thing that could be brought into this site plan that would allow for people going to the gym, going down to their aerobics class or what have you, and there happens to be a full-service, a full-size basketball court and that, or something that again might be something that would be more in tune with the city having some sort of ownership responsibility or something along those lines. Can you speak to your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, the site plan's been pretty much laid out. It's been highly compact. It's only 90 usable acres. So you'd look at the amenity package. Maybe you could go back. What we have are the promenades, but we also, if you go back to the original site, go back a couple more. Yeah. So to the far east of the East-West Boulevard, there's an amphitheater overlooking that pond, right there, if you see the red dot. And then we have active pocket parks throughout the site, kid tot lots. We do have the large area, which is the protected area around the Melford House. And then we have the cemetery just to the north of that. But the amenitization is what we're describing there. It was not envisioned to put something like a basketball or tennis courts in. However, within the existing flex buildings that are down along Route 50, I mean, if a private sector person came and said, look, I want to rent or build one of these flex buildings, I'm sure they lay out for it. I know over the years I've spoken to people like the Boys and Girls Club and that, and nobody from the private sectors really wanted to tackle it. So that's sort of the long-winded story to it. But I think the amenitization package there is what we've envisioned for it, not to get into the business of doing the basketball courts. But like I said, those flex buildings could be rented for that purpose. There's also, within the flex buildings too, there's been some health centers or what do you call those? Not rehab, fitness centers or gyms, but also again on the private sector side. Yep. Yeah.
Just historically, while this was a compact development, it was really never intended for the active recreation, heavy active recreation that was supposed to be provided in other facilities. As part of that, over the years, this project has given a lot of money to the county's Green Branch Athletic Complex. In fact, the conceptual site plan, the original conceptual site plan required a $250,000 payment towards amenities, which I know those are planned amenities, but they're nearby. And the point was that was supposed to be the proximate active outdoor or large, court-based recreation opportunities in a facility such as that. There's other facilities too, as part of the covenant presentation and beyond, where we showed in proximity how close a lot of city facilities are to this project as well. So it allows us to be compact and sustainable within the 90 acres, and allowing those more expansive, land-intensive type uses to be provided elsewhere.
And don't misunderstand, I'm not necessarily expecting that there is a lack of support on your side for amenities. I recognize that there's a lot of other infrastructure out there in terms of paths and parks and so forth. Right. I'm trying to figure out a way to solve a number of problems in the community and looking for options here. And to your point, flex space might be a viable option as well. And I'm not expecting that St. John's is going to come in and say, I'm going to say, oh yeah, sure, here's 4 basketball courts worth of free space for you guys to use. What I'm looking for is some kind of an opening and a dialogue to discuss what the potential options might be, because I do know that a lot of those buildings have certainly have the square footage, but they may not have the structural capability to do that. But at this stage, they've not yet been built. And I don't know what limitations there are in the existing stock of space that you have, whether it's open space without posts or beams that aren't too low for someone trying to toss a ball into an infinitely small hoop. At least when I'm shooting, anyway, it looks that way. So I know that there's more to it than that. My point is, I'd like to get into a discussion about what some of those might be, as well as if there is space in this particular site plan for some infrastructure along those lines. Yeah. So I guess my point is, I'm not looking for a handout, a freebie necessarily, but looking to try and solve the problem.
Yeah, we'd be more than happy to talk to you about it. But again, tonight we're talking about the Melford Village, the flex space down on the other end. That's easy to discuss offline. More than happy.
All right. There was some discussion in the meeting that we held last week of the impact of traffic this construction will have. Can you highlight, just because a lot of people weren't party to that, and they have an opportunity to watch it at home on TV. Can you speak to what your expectations are for this this particular site plan on the traffic? What the impact will be for traffic?
Well, the traffic scenario, the impact of this aspect of it is, it really can't be separated from the whole. The whole of the Melford Town Center was evaluated as part of the preliminary plan of subdivision. It was tested, made subject to a traffic impact analysis, which was done in accordance with all governmental requirements in terms of the timing of the counts, the number of counts, the levels of service for the critical intersections. And as part of that, it was determined that the improvements made over time by this developer historically had basically accommodated almost the entirety of its impact to the road network, which is a regional road network, which does have regional congestion issues, and we're not denying that. As part of that transportation impact statement in the preliminary plan, it was also analyzed that in order to have the Harbor Way 301 or Maryland 3 intersection meet the mitigation requirements for this project, there had to be some improvements done there, additional improvements. Those additional improvements are conditioned on this project. They need to be permitted, bonded prior to the first construction permit for this aspect of the Melford Town Center. So we're committed to that. That's going to add an addition. That's going to change the turn lane, through lane scenario at that intersection. It's also going to lead to longer green light time on the main line, which really is the main part of the congestion there. It's the number of lights just south of this project and north of this project, which causes stalled congestion at times during heavy peak hours. So as part of the impact of this project, that's been analyzed, and we certainly are going to adhere to those conditions, and those are carried forth through not just this detailed site plan, but any detailed site plan affecting the Melford Town Center.
Right. But in the meeting, we spoke a little bit more in detail about the specific impact of this little retail section here, and so I don't want to. I guess I'll just lead you right to where I was going, which was your assertion was that through the development of this retail, that it would actually have a reducing impact on the traffic going in and out of Melford development because of the need to support local buyers, local workers in that environment.
Correct.
Can you speak to that?
Yes, and thank you. And I'm sorry, I misinterpreted your question, or I jumped the gun before we got to your actual question. With regards to that, we talked about the whole premise of mixed use, and part of the reasons why some of the employment uses are at a suboptimal tenancy rate is because the amenities, restaurants, recreational amenities, service amenities aren't present. And through the provisions like in the Retail Village East, which we hope will provide those opportunities, rather than a worker getting in their car for lunch, for example, they wouldn't have to. They could walk across the street or stay in their car and stay within the project and not have, say, lunchtime traffic go off into the road network. In terms of the balance of the in and out, I think we had some discussion about that at the meeting. As part of the traffic impact statement, we talked about the peak hour ins and outs. When you have a completely employment use, a single use park such as this is right now before the mixed use comes online, you have everybody coming in essentially at peak hour, and then everybody leaving in the evening peak hour when they come home from work. By having a mix of use, we're having folks where they are able to live, have retail opportunities, and work. You have a greater mix, a greater balance, so you don't have that vacuum effect for people being sucked in the morning solely and being sucked out in the evening solely for tenants or users utilizing this park. So there's a greater balance. It's not a 50-50 balance, but it is a more of a balanced approach for in and out traffic than you would currently see if this were to develop all as an employment use.
Mm-hmm. So as part of that discussion, there was also issue that came up about destination retail versus big box destination versus a local support retail. I forgot what the terminology you used for that was. Is the current infrastructure that you're proposing here is all supposed to be for local, correct?
Essentially, yes. This is not, I think our largest potential user would be our food store. And that footprint really will accommodate about 20,000 square feet. That's a small food store, where typically a food store, a giant, wants anywhere between 60 to 100,000 square feet, depending on what it is. This is not intended for that. There's plenty of opportunities elsewhere within the city for that to be. We're not looking to compete with that. We're really looking to service the needs of the mixed use users, tenants, residents, employees, so they can stay in one place longer without, again, adding, lessening the trips and impacts, but also, making this a place where people want to live and they want to work because they have those options available to them within close distance.
Okay. So I guess my next thing is, with all that in mind, it's my understanding. So what we're looking for here in these locations is going to be small stores.
Yes.
And my concern is I want to make sure that we keep them as small stores and not turn this into a source of traffic, a destination type of retail, that it maintains its community feel. And I want to ask that kind of staff think about what the appropriate size level would be for stores that we want to suggest would be the maximum size that we would want to have in any particular type of store in that area, to ensure that we don't see at some point down the road a drifting off into as the cycle changes or as a request or a new tenant comes to play, having all of a sudden a big space in that area turning into a destination, perhaps not a Walmart, of course. They wouldn't be satisfied with the entire space as their parking lot, but nonetheless, there is potential for that.
Well, certainly the layout right here is amenable really only to the smaller users. There is an issue in terms of visibility for this project. If you're talking about like a large neighborhood retail center, they're going to want major retail center visibility, large signage, visibility from highways. That's not really present here. I guess the beauty of the process with the covenants that we have is it really is a check and balance here. It's a trust but verify in terms of what's actually built, how it looks, what it is. This hearing itself is evidence of that. So if that were to happen, hypothetically, where it would be transitioned to a larger footprint, to support a larger neighborhood retail user, box user. That would have to come through a detailed site plan revision. Those elements would have to be shown, the parking, the elevations, the size, and that would have to come here first. And I think we'd all agree today that that's not the character of what the Melford Town Center was premised on through the design guidelines and all those elements. So while we don't think that would ever happen, we think this process is set up so it comes here first, and it isn't done in a vacuum. It isn't done in the back of a smoke-filled room. It's done out in the open, but we don't think that's ever going to happen. And we think just the location of this, its visibility, the size of these footprints. As Ms. Rice mentioned, at one point we had the ability to do 24,000 square feet, 8,000 square foot buildings in front of Melford 2, the second large office buildings. We had zero interest, zero for years. And that's because of the lack of the mix of uses. So I think that's just evidence historically that this isn't a prime, large-scale retail source. These are targeted for those mixed users, end users. So I think the process really will accommodate, this layout accommodates the goals here from the design guidelines, and the process moving forward would allow the opportunity for any type of scrutiny of larger footprints that would be of more of the concern that you're raising.
Yeah, and this is a continuing concern for a lot of people. They see the retail environment in the city, and whether it's perceived or real, that the concern that there is a diminishment in both either the occupancy rates or the quality of the stores that are coming in, and are concerned about the overall well-being for retail in the community. And people are very concerned that this could have a deleterious effect on the rest of the retail environment. And I think in my mind, I want to make sure that we have things in place that prevent this from being a weakening agent for the rest of retail. We obviously spent a lot of money recently on renovating one, we being the city, $900,000 for helping to tear down an old retail center that was an eyesore, and we want to ensure that we don't have that sort of continuing evolution of retail where now it's someplace else that starts to falter because of too much competition. And that is a concern for me and a lot of people in the community. Okay. Last week we had a session. Our police department was here and did a nice presentation on, as nice as you can be when you're talking crime, about crime statistics, how we were doing, and things along those lines. One of the things I raised at that time was the police department's involvement in helping retailers, helping building owners and the like in their need to help with security on their properties, to work collaboratively with people to help reduce the potential for crime, whether it's retail theft or whether it's smashing windows in a car to get a purse or some other device out of a car. The site plan that you have, has there been any security plan developed for that? Is there a security plan that would outline where the cameras might be, whether there may be some architectural or landscaping features that might be put into play to help reduce or discourage crime in this area? It's not that I expect this to be, a high crime rate, central, but we've seen in places elsewhere in the community, wherever you have large groups of people collecting, that's going to attract, nefarious activity. And if you have access to roads that can get you in and out of town quickly, that I think puts you further up on the risk register. Have you done anything in regards to that?
I'll let Mr. Al speak to that, gentlemen.
Yeah, you're getting a little bit ahead of where we are, but just for, to show you what we have around us, this is the Prince George's County 911 Emergency Call Center. So I don't know how often you've been out, but it's completely, there's a lot of police going back and forth all the time, just going back and forth to work with marked cars and unmarked cars. And then just off to where about where that is right there is the Institute for Defense Analysis, which is sort of it's a wholly owned subsidiary of the DOD. Same thing, it's highly securitized. And over here, even with the Census Bureau, where is that? Right here. So we have quite a few of the sort of governmental sort of security things, and down here with the Holocaust Museum. So just the background of having the police 911 there, that would, I mean, I guess most criminals aren't thinking too straight, but that would probably be a pretty bad idea to go in there. But when we get to the point of working with the tenants, I know as far as property management goes with St. John, we would, obviously we're the owner of the facilities. It's got a cap value of about $18 million. We want to see it go right. It's right across the street from the Aspen, which is about $100 million. So we're heavily invested into it, so we'll make sure that it works out. I imagine the property management people will talk to the tenants, and they'll be, some of those will probably be sophisticated tenants. So on the fast casual people like a Chipotle or all the rest of those people, they're national chains that will come in there, and I imagine our people will work with their people. And again, we're happy to talk and coordinate and collaborate with the police.
Okay. I would not, having been engaged with, let me restate that. Having seen how little other federal agencies are willing to do, I assure you, nobody from the census, they're not going to send their police force over to police our retail center, notwithstanding the fact that they have certainly plenty of opportunity to have official vehicles going and coming. They're not going to reach beyond their borders. And a lot of time, their jurisdiction doesn't hold up for that. But they make good neighbors. You know, they're always nice to have. And I think, let's see if I have any other questions here. There was a question that just came to mind as I read that citizen input. Can you speak to the issue of the parking spaces? If there is a county requirement for 290 spaces, and we're seeing in the plan 317, and we're suggesting that this is a local support that we expect to be supported by people walking over from the apartments or coming over from the community on paths. Can you speak to why there's a difference between that?
So the parking spaces are dictated by the county zoning ordinance. So in the MXT zone, which is what we're located in, there's an opportunity to take credit for nearby parking spaces and for shared uses. If one were to apply the strict parking schedule set forth in the county zoning ordinance for commercial zones, the 295 off-street spaces wouldn't be enough to accommodate the minimum parking requirement for 58,000 square feet of retail. What we're able to do here is to take discounts for the opportunity for shared uses, shared parking trips. We're able to leverage nearby parking lots, such as the Melford 2 building, which is across the street to the west from the Retail Village East, kind of like where the blue outline is for the future retail. So that's already kind of built in. Now, one looking at a vacuum, just looking at the layout, you would say, oh, well, 295 spaces, that's a ton of spaces. But from a market standpoint, in a commercial setting, that wouldn't be enough for what a retail tenant would want normally if they had a single-use retail environment. But because of the innovation and the flexibility of the MXT zone, we're allowed, pursuant to the county zoning ordinance, to take credit for these mix of spaces. So that's why the number is where it is. But it's really a modest number. It isn't reflective of what a standalone commercial user would want.
Is there any way that the county guidelines would allow you to have it lower?
Yes, it would be, but then you run into the friction of what the tenants want. So as we mentioned, we had the 24,000 square feet ability over the years, and while parking wasn't the driver for it, once you're able to convince tenants to come in to a new mixed-use environment, well, then they're going to say, well, great, we're going to have these tenants here, they can walk, or residents they can walk, or employees, but what about if somebody wants to take their car? How close is the parking to my front door? There's certain parking best practices and demands that all tenants want. And what we provided here is really what we can do in that compact footprint, but it really already is going below what a traditional tenant would want from a parking space standard. So to actually lessen it and just take them off and make it green space or for so many spaces, that really wouldn't fit the purposes of kind of remaining compact and sustainable, but also meeting the needs of commercial tenants who really they like the people nearby and be able to walk, but they also want to be able to offer the opportunity for people to park their car if they're not willing to walk to their use. So we really think we're kind of walking the thin, the narrow line as to what's appropriate, and we're kind of right there. So we're really haven't thought about reducing it. If we could find more parking spaces within close proximity without defeating the vision of what we're trying to do in the Melford Town Center, I think we probably would add spaces as opposed to delete it. But we think what we got is a good balance.
All right, so what is the minimum allowable for that space?
Well, it depends.
Given what you have planned.
Just within the red area, we couldn't go any lower within the red area. As I said, we're leveraging the future Retail Village West parking to meet the requirements of the office buildings and these retail uses. So I haven't done an analysis of, could we take 20 more spaces away? I don't know that, but we're already below the minimum, and we're utilizing the ability to leverage these other uses. So the reduction is based on the proximity of these other uses. We're already going below. Could we go lower? That's not something we're interested. We'd like to find as many opportunities as possible to park, but this is really the comfort spot. So we haven't really pursued reducing that any further.
Yeah. And I think you can see where I'm going with this. The more parking spaces, the more trips in, the more traffic, the more that it's in my mind, becomes an opportunity for a destination center, and that's kind of my concern.
Well, we welcome people from the outside. We're going to have the building 4, the restaurant, sit-down restaurant. We want people to come in. Our tenants want them to come in. It's about having that interest. I mean, that's the whole purpose of the MXT zone, is to create, they call it a 24/7 environment, but we're not walling ourselves off from those opportunities. So, but in terms of the large regional draw, where people are going to park their car and do all their grocery shopping, that is not this center. It never will be this center. So I think that gets to the heart of your concern, and any changes to that paradigm would have to come back through a detailed site plan revision.
Okay. And there was a question raised about permeability of paving and so forth, and I believe you addressed this before. There was a 10% requirement?
Yes. There's a condition in the conceptual site plan where you look to reduce impervious surfaces in parking to the reasonable extent practical, and in consistency with the approved stormwater management plan approved through the city. That stormwater management plan said, where soil conditions allow, surface parking spaces, which we have here, 10% of those spaces should be permeable pavement. We've identified 10 spaces. It's around, actually, the sit-down restaurant. 10% of those spaces on the perimeter, those would be made with permeable pavement. So we would be in conformance with that requirement. I will mention that, and this came up in the Aspen, that's a structured parking facility, and that's for that type of building, it's a great compact development technique, sparing a large expanse of surface parking. So I think we really have the best of both worlds. We have a mixed-use surface parking lot with 10% permeable pavement next to a residential structure, which is essentially all structured parking, which is sustainable impervious reduction technique. So.
Okay, thank you. And then the next question I have is for staff, specifically with regard to the issue of service levels for traffic and for the our ability to, in my mind, it's my understanding that we have crossed that bridge, but I'm looking for a definitive answer to that on what our legal obligations are in terms of what we are allowed to approve or disapprove based on the issues such as traffic levels, which my understanding would have been addressed earlier.
Councilmember Wolfley, this is Joe Meinert, Planning Director. I think you are correct in your observation that the subject of the traffic situation in relation to the city code was addressed during this council's review of the conceptual site plan. And at that time, the applicant had proffered to make some improvements on Bel Air Drive to compensate for the impact. Bel Air Drive was already at the level of service that was not acceptable, but we found as part of the council's action a solution that would benefit the neighborhood in terms of increasing the safety of people using Bel Air Drive. And so they pursued and obtained the permit. I believe they've obtained the permit to do 4 traffic calming measures to satisfy that proffer requirement. The project, I think, as Mr. Antonetti had mentioned, was reviewed through the preliminary plan of subdivision stage at the county, and that's when the actual test for traffic is done, and the application met all of the county's requirements for APF approval. So that, I think you're correct that it was addressed in the prior reviews.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, sir. Any other questions? Mr. Stead?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate the applicant joining us tonight and the many meetings that you've had related to this particular project. Mr. Wolfley touched on this. Can you just go over briefly the overall stormwater management plan? You've got the 10% impermeability requirement that you've met. You mentioned the structured parking related to the Aspen. Overall stormwater management was touched on a little bit in your presentation earlier, but can you just give us a quick recap?
Sure. Well, as you can see just through the colored render plan behind you, there's several very large regional facilities where which handle the quantity of stormwater runoff. It's certainly has the capacity to carry more water than what would be generated by this project or what's out there existing, certainly. In addition, as we went through the stormwater management concept update as part of the mixed-use plan, we did have the opportunity, well, had the requirement of doing environmental site design aspects, small bioretention areas, throughout the different aspects of the project. So those are all part of the plan. I'm not smart enough to say exactly what they are, where they're specifically located, but they are identified through that plan, and we adhere to that as we go through each section of the project. I'd also mention, too, that the reason why we care about the impact of stormwater runoff and such, and why this site does such a good job is the proximity to the Patuxent River. As part of the development of this project, and as part of the conceptual site plan development, we were required back in 2006, I believe, to dedicate nearly 100 acres to the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission, the area abutting the Patuxent River watershed. So not only are we doing the on-site quantity and quality controls required by our stormwater management plan, but we also have that 100-acre buffer, which was a donation made by this developer, and I think it shows their commitment to keeping a clean environment and not impacting those sensitive areas.
And from my reading, it seems that you are exceeding your stormwater management requirements in most categories, so I appreciate that. Thank you for commenting on that.
Sure.
Mr. Wolfley touched on this for the bikeability and walkability. You discussed the parking at length. As far as connecting this particular commercial center to the existing, or to the, I guess I should say, to the residential development that you're anticipating building down the road, what plans do you currently have? I know in the pictures we saw some bikes, we saw some people walking, but is there a particular vision as far as, where's Dustin Kazan, is he listening, as far as multimodal connection between the residential and commercial?
My ears were ringing when I was listening to the presentation. It's good to hear. I think it really is an indicator of what this project is meant to be. As I mentioned, when we had the conceptual site plan, it had the design guidelines as part of it, and it's a kind of a regulating document which shows how the various aspects of the Melford Town Center are developed. And it was interdependent on multimodal modes of transportation. That includes significant sidewalks, both sides of the street, pedestrian connections. We show that with the Aspen building, where we had connections going around the property, connecting to the trail that exists around what we call the lower pond, which is really the pond up there. It's just that's just the nomenclature for it. We also have the requirement of doing a master plan trail connection along that 100-acre corridor, which is part of our conditions of approval, which we're required to do with, pursuant to the requirements of the Maryland National Capital Park Planning Commission. So we're going to provide that, including a trailhead parking facility for that connection off to the east. And then additionally for pedestrian connections, we're going to have the connection, I guess, out Melford Boulevard under the bridge spans, kind of providing an outward orientation towards community for folks if they want to utilize it coming in or out. But that's an opportunity as well. And then finally for bicyclists, some of you may bicycle, this is meant to allow those opportunities as our perspective shown. We're placed, we're called sharrows on many of our main arteries throughout the project. So it's really a shared road provision. There'll be appropriate indicators on the road and signage to show that, hey, you're sharing the road with bicyclists as well as vehicles. So, it really is going to be a coming together of many of the principles shown by the Green Team and what they're looking for in Bowie as this sense of community redefined and recreated in projects such as the Melford Town Center.
Perfect. And internally from the design map, it looks like that pretty much anyone in one of the residential areas will be able to walk and bike pretty safely and pretty easily.
Absolutely.
To
That's
the other
the whole
areas
point.
there. Delightful. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
My only remaining question, two quick things. You have a lot of employment currently there.
Correct.
Big employment center, a lot of doctors, a lot of people back there. My understanding is there's not a lot in the way of existing retail to support those employment centers. Can you describe what is currently there?
Yeah, I might steal Mr. Rout's thunder, but I believe the only retail existing is about a 500 square foot deli in Melford 1, which is the first office building when you come in off of Melford Drive. It's changed ownership a couple times. Quite frankly, I don't know how they make it from year to year, but it really isn't a sought after amenity on the project. Where they do the best they can. They serve good food, encourage you to go out and use it. But that's really been the only retail amenity that's come to fruition, and even that struggled at times through the changing of ownership. So we hope to change that whole outlook by getting more interest and having more opportunities for the existing employment tenants and employees to utilize here in the the Retail Village East.
Gotcha. Because I do have concerns, and we've talked about this before, about the residential side, and I have some worries on that end. But strictly on the commercial end, you have a lot of employers there. I like the employer center concept of the whole Melford thing, and so from what I'm looking at, the commercial retail you're proposing is small scale. And it supports the employers, at a bare minimum. Ideally, obviously you're hoping it will also support and be supported by the future residential that'll come along. But on my end, I am glad that we are putting something there that can support, the many people who, have created jobs, and hopefully we can get we can leverage, or you guys will be able to leverage this center to encourage more employers to move in.
Absolutely.
And to take care of some of that vacancy rate a little bit. So on my end, I have fewer problems with this commercial retail component, in large part because I think it'll go a long way in supporting in part the employer center that's there. And finally, it was mentioned earlier about a discussion related to brick pavers. On the actual streets that the city of Bowie will be maintaining, it sounds like there will not be any brick pavers in any of those streets. Is that correct, or intersections?
No, that's not correct. If we could go back to if you could point to Jennifer moving that would the brick pavers. Sorry. Oh, gotcha. Excuse me. It's new technology here. Brick pavers here. Brick pavers here, and brick pavers at this intersection. So dealing with staff, working with staff, coming up with kind of an urban design perspective. They feel that those are the most appropriate spaces for them. We're not in disagreement with them. We've worked hard to come up with a configuration that is safe, is best for maintenance purposes, but those would be the spots that would be the brick pavers and that we would agree to do. The rest of the crossings will be kind of this thermostamp. It goes over stamped asphalt. Technologically speaking, it's really made huge strides over what the product offerings you may have seen in earlier retail settings. For example, the Bowie Town Center, you may see those look more, they've worn a bit more. The technology's really improved, so you have the opportunity to have those in other spaces, and they look fantastic. They wear very well. So it'll be a combination of both, but there will be brick pavers as part of our agreement with staff in those appropriate locations.
So I'm actually not in love with real brick pavers. We're spending a small fortune right now in my neighborhood trying to replace a bunch. And I take it the city will be responsible for maintaining those. I think that's currently the agreement the city has. So if you guys are using a technology that gives the appearance of brick pavers and you feel comfortable about that it's not actual brick that's going to end up all over the place after the next snowstorm, I'll feel good about that. But I know I'm sure there'll be an ongoing conversation. That's all I have on my end. I appreciate your time, and I'm sure my colleagues have a couple more questions.
Thank you, sir. Any other questions? Mr. Wolfley.
Quick question. I actually do have one more question for you. We had, I think, again, going back to our conversation at our community session last week about the willingness of your organization collectively to be supportive of the city's efforts to improve traffic on the 301 corridor and just infrastructure with regard to the state, understanding your long history of having already made the direct improvements as part of this process some time ago, including turn lanes and all that. I'm not saying that we're looking for more in terms of actual cash on the barrelhead, but in terms of providing support along the same lines that you guys have agreed to providing support for, efforts to, get public transit in and that sort of thing. Can you speak to that?
Well, that was one of the, thank you. That was one of the most refreshing aspects of the meeting that we had was the takeaway where through the conversation, folks were saying, look, we like your design. We like your uses, how it looks. Our main concern overwhelmingly is traffic. And I think the word was, we don't mean to attack you but there's a regional traffic issue. And we've never turned from that. We recognize that. Certainly, I appreciate your point that we've made our contribution to public facility requirements to mitigate our impact for those regional traffic issues. But they still exist, and they'll exist with or without this project. To that end, I also stated at that meeting that certainly any proposal, any public effort to invest in our highways, invest in our infrastructure to alleviate, make traffic better. That's not just good for for the residents of Beller Drive or Sherwood Manor. It's for the future users, residents of Melford. I mean, anything that makes the regional traffic situation better, I think we'd be in support of. So I think as I speak on behalf of the company, but moving forward, we said that at that meeting, we would stick to that, and yes, be supportive of any effort public effort to improve that infrastructure. I think that would be good for everybody. A rising tide raises all ships, so we believe that would be true for this situation.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Make a motion.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to make a motion that we return this issue to staff and the developer to address the following issues.
I'm sorry, I didn't get the first part.
I'd like to make a motion that we return this proposal to staff to address the following issues. To incorporate solar into the site plan, to incorporate level 2 and high-speed electric vehicle charging into the site plan, to discuss and consider the possibility of anything in this site plan itself that might be viable for basketball use, to adopt a maximum store size in square feet for this site to ensure minimal traffic impact on the neighboring community, to develop and incorporate a security plan for the site and review with the Bowie Police Department and incorporate their feedback as appropriate. To Mr. Stev's point, to the use of stamped concrete instead of pavers, and then to also take the opportunity to meet with staff to discuss and establish some sort of partnership to pursue improved traffic on the 3301 corridor.
Hear no second?
Second?
You seconded, the motion is to send it, send this back to staff without acting on it? Do you want to approve it? Is that your motion? I'm sorry. Is your motion to send this back without acting on it?
Yes.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, you have a motion to send it back. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion dies. Is there a second motion?
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a second motion to accept staff's approval and move this forward.
What was your motion, Councilmember?
Move for staff recommendation.
I second it.
Okay. All right, you have a motion to move forward with staff's recommendation for approval. Any questions on the motion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
I'd like to know if we could amend the motion to include some of the recommendations that Councilman Wolfley has put forward, that the developer will be asked to talk about the solar, the, you had a couple of things.
The electrical.
The solar, the electrical
vehicle,
inclusion.
And the stamped pavement.
And the stamped pavement.
Is-
Would you be willing to amend?
So you're asking them
Yes.
to be included as considerations?
Correct. That we
Considerations
will.
for staff and the developer to continue to look at this as this goes forward?
Correct, exactly.
Is that what you want to do?
So I'm asking that we
Okay.
amend Mr.
Do you have
Marcus's.
any objection with that? I don't.
Okay, sorry.
Wait a minute. We got to go back to make sure.
I actually don't believe the stamp is a good idea. Pavers are a much more appealing appearance. If you've been around the city, and we've been doing the stamped brick patterns for quite a while, after about 6 months to a year, they look almost disgusting. They're very hard to repaint and keep looking. But I think overall, this developer's been put through quite a bit, and they keep bending, they do everything we ask. At some point, I think we need to just move this thing forward. So I don't agree with I think that the solar will most likely end up being a choice from whatever business goes in, not the actual developer. I'm okay with the paving. I think we need to just wrap this thing up. So I'll give in on one.
Okay, how about the solar then? I'm happy to strike the pavers. If you think those were a better idea, I'm happy to go with those. So not make that a condition.
But what I'm saying is the solar is most likely going to end up being a choice of the retail leasee.
The individual businesses that go in?
Not the leaseor.
Gotcha. Mr. Rowd indicated earlier that he'd be open to a conversation with staff on the overall topic.
As long as it's conversation, not predetermined. Like Councilman Marco said, we don't know what individual, what tax credits will be like at that point in the future. I mean, it's just such a moving target, so I don't want to sit there and say, X tenant or this building will take it. That person might flat out don't want to deal with it, roof penetrations, all the rest of it. So as long as it's for discussion, sure.
There's one more thing you're not thinking of, not to belabor it, but the Melford House, the environmental setting, there's the Historic Preservation Commission, which basically they'll review every application around the perimeter of the environmental setting. And in the past, solar arrays have had certain aesthetic impacts on environmental settings, historic settings, such as the Melford House. So even if we wanted to say, yes, we'll absolutely do solar, it would still be subject to the Historic Preservation Commission. So, while it shouldn't be a requirement, we'd certainly be willing to have it as a consideration. There's other entities, third parties that are beyond our control that could come in and say, no, you can't have it. So I don't think we could commit to having solar as part of this.
No. I think that's probably correct. Okay, Mr. Marcus, you had a motion. I'm sorry, I withdraw my request for an amendment to the motion.
Okay, so I make the motion to accept staff's recommendation to move this forward project with the conditions of, we'll look at.
Considerations. With the consideration between the applicant and staff regarding the solar, potential for solar and
Yes.
potential for the pavers.
For the charging station.
But this
Yes.
is the motion is to approve staff's recommendation for, planning board recommendation for approval with those conditions.
Yes.
Is that your motion?
Considerations, not conditions.
Considerations.
Yes.
And who was, is that your second? Who seconded the motion?
Mr. Gardner.
Oh, I second the
Oh, okay.
motion, yes.
Is that okay with you?
I'm looking to these guys.
Wait a minute. Is that okay? Are those conditions okay with you, Mr. Garner?
Yes, they are.
Okay.
Are they okay?
All right, so we have a motion on the table for approval with those conditions. Everybody understand the motion?
Yep.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? 4-1. Good night. Mr. Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, everyone, for coming out this evening. I'd like to move to a closed session for statutory authority for general provisions, Articles 3-305, to consider a matter that concerns the proposal for a business or an industrial organization to locate, expand, or remain in the state, and to consult with counsel to obtain legal advice on a legal matter.
Second? Mr. Marcus? Move to second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous. Good night, folks. We're going to
Good night,
executive
folks.
session.